Candles flickered against carved wood panels as servants moved in careful lines, balancing platters heavy with roasted game and sugared confections. On the table, pewter plates shone with a soft grey sheen, symbols of status as much as tableware. Between haunches of meat and trenchers of bread, the unfamiliar fruit lay arranged in careful slices, its red skin glowing against the dull metal. Guests leaned closer, curiosity mixing with caution, then lifted the juicy wedges to their mouths. The fruit's flesh released a tart, bright flavour that cut through the fat of the meal, leaving a metallic sweetness most could not name. Knives scraped against the plates, pressing the pulp into the pewter, drawing out a faint, invisible residue. Toasts followed, wine flowed, and the hall grew louder as the night lengthened. Hours later the mood shifted. A nobleman doubled over, clutching his stomach. Another guest paled, hands trembling, as the laughter thinned to uneasy silence. By dawn, chambers, once filled with music, held only the sounds of retching and laboured breathing. Physicians hurried between rooms, sniffing vials, examining tongues and probing abdomens, their remedies drawn from the same medical traditions that misread so many ailments. Servants remembered the strange red fruit and murmured in the corridors. Surviving guests repeated the association in hushed tones. Those who had eaten the most of the new delicacy seemed the sickest, and some did not rise again. In the crowded markets of Tenochtitlan, traders arranged heaps of small, glossy tomatoes beside baskets of maize and strings of dried chilies. Women squatted behind stone mortars, grinding ripe fruits into thick, fragrant pastes with roasted seeds and fresh herbs. Steam rose from clay pots, where tomatoes simmered in stews, their acidity softened by long cooking. Children snatched pieces of flatbread dipped in tomato sauces, while elders discussed harvests and seed saving. Tomatoes mingled with cacao in spiced drinks and complex sauces that accompanied meat, fish, and insects. Healers prescribed tomato preparations to cool fevers or ease digestive troubles, treating the plant as useful rather than dangerous. Nahuatl words for the fruit appeared in tribute lists and household inventories, counted alongside beans and squash. Bernardino de Sahagún and other chroniclers took note, describing recipes, market prices, and growing practices without warnings of toxicity or fear. On terraced plots around villages and cities, gardeners tended tomato plants among amaranth, chilies, and medicinal herbs. Knowledge of when to sow, how to prune, and which fruits to save for seed passed through families, embedded in ritual and routine. When Spanish soldiers and priests arrived, they tasted sauces thickened with tomatoes and recorded the unfamiliar flavours. Seeds and seedlings travelled in leather pouches and damp baskets toward coastal ports, then boarded ships bound for European gardens. In cloistered gardens and palace courtyards, the first tomato plants rested in orderly beds, framed by gravel paths and low stone walls. Their strange, ridged fruits hung beneath sticky leaves, sharing space with aloe, foxglove, and medicinal herbs catalogued by careful hands. Labels written in Latin identified them as novelties from distant lands. Visitors bent close to inspect the plants, tracing the grooves of each fruit, yet few considered breaking the skin with their teeth. Botanists measured the plant's height, counted their leaf segments, and pressed blossoms between paper sheets for herbarium collections. They compared the fruits to known nightshades and eggplants, noting resemblances that quietly suggested danger. In study rooms that smelled of ink and drying plants, scholars copied Pietro Andrea Mattioli's description of the yellow tomato, repeating his judgment that it belonged among eggplants rather than common vegetables. Pages filled with cautious observation but not with recipes. In kitchens near these gardens, cooks sometimes tested the unfamiliar fruits, dicing them with garlic or stewing them with oil, especially in parts of Italy where experimentation felt less risky. Yet the dishes remained rare, overshadowed by grains, olives and grapes that had fed generations. Among the upper classes, the tomatoes place stayed closer to carved marble and perfumed flowers than to bread or meat. It decorated terraces and parterres, shaping reputations long before it shaped meals. In cramped libraries, candlelight fell across pages where inked diagrams compared petals, sepals and stamens of nightshade plants. Scholars traced the shared star-shaped blossoms and the way the fruit swelled from a cup-like base. Tomatoes, newly arrived and poorly understood, fit that pattern too well. Between pressed belladonna sprigs and brittle mandrake roots, tomato vines appeared as suspicious relatives, their glossy fruits catalogued beside ingredients of potions, poisons and narcotics. Physicians copied each other's warnings into Latin and vernacular herbals, noting how some nightshades dilated pupils, clouded vision, and slowed breathing. Without clear methods for controlled trials, they leaned on resemblance and rumour. If berries from one branch of this family could kill, they reasoned, another's bright globes might do the same. Marginal notes advised moderation or outright avoidance, especially for the sick, whose unbalanced humours were thought to invite hidden toxins. Tomatoes offered no obvious medicinal virtue in those texts. They cured no famous ailment, supplied no vital spice, and lacked the established authority of grains, grapes, or olives. Gardeners treated them as ornamental curiosities, letting the vines climb trellises, more for spectacle than sustenance. In city markets, piles of familiar cabbages and onions overshadowed the few crimson fruits on display, which lingered unsold while whispers repeated that such beautiful skins must conceal something harmful. In crowded dining rooms lit by tallow candles, polished pewter gleamed beneath steaming dishes. Wealthy households laid out tomatoes beside roasted meats and thick gravies, their bright skins pressed directly against plates and tankards rich in lead. In kitchens below, cooks simmered tomato ragouts in pewter and copper, letting the fruit's sharp acidity work unseen against the metal. No one noticed that with every fragrant sauce and garnish, a little more lead leached into the meal. After such meals, bouts of sickness followed with unnerving irregularity. Some diners complained of cramping stomachs and violent vomiting, others of throbbing headaches, confusion, and trembling hands. Servants carried basins to bedchambers, opened windows against the smell, and whispered about curses or spoiled food. Physicians arrived with lancets and purgatives, leafed through worn medical texts, and recorded symptoms in neat Latin. They listed fevers, fits, and lingering weakness, but never suspected the tableware that had served the tomatoes. Beyond these houses, farm labourers and artisans ate coarse bread, grains, and root vegetables from wooden bowls and rough, unglazed pottery. Their meals rarely included tomatoes, which remained expensive curiosities associated with fashionable gardens and urban markets. In city homes where wealth allowed experimentation, repeated illness seemed to follow the same vivid red fruit. Diaries, medical notes, and household letters described strange ailments rising after tomato dishes, turning coincidence into conviction that the plant itself carried a subtle, untraceable poison. In crowded city markets, stalls displayed bright clusters of tomatoes beside piles of familiar roots and grains, yet hands reached for them hesitantly. Street vendors called out their names in different tongues, repeating love apples or wolf peaches with a mix of amusement and unease. A few buyers wrapped them carefully, intending to cook them into sauces. Others purchased only one or two, planning to place them on windowsills as ornaments rather than food. In the homes of physicians and apothecaries, thick volumes lay open on wooden tables, their margins filled with cramped annotations about this puzzling fruit. Some writers described flushed faces and restless sleep after eating tomatoes, attributing such episodes to overheated blood or disordered humours. Others copied second-hand tales of stomach pains and clouded thoughts, turning them into case examples. Ink-stained fingers underlined passages that warned of madness, then cautiously added question marks. Beyond the libraries, gardens behind townhouses and monasteries displayed careful rows of medicinal herbs interrupted by unfamiliar, sprawling tomato vines. Gardeners tied the stems to stakes, inspected the swelling fruits, and commented that the colours seemed too vivid to be wholesome. In some districts, officials walked the plots with lists in hand, reciting the names of plants that required oversight. They recorded tomatoes beside known poisons, reinforcing quiet suspicions already rooted in rumour and uncertainty. Along coastal ports and inland towns of the young United States, tomato vines climbed fences and garden walls, yet their fruit often went untouched. In many English-descended communities, householders treated the plants as novelties, positioned beside exotic flowers rather than in kitchen beds. Local newspapers reprinted cautious notices from London and Paris, warning that these bright red globes might unsettle the blood or strain the stomach. Tomatoes appeared in seed catalogues, but brief notes hinted at danger, advising restraint or ornamental use. Southward, the air carried different aromas. In port cities linked to the Caribbean and along the Gulf Coast, cooks stirred chopped tomatoes into peppery stews and long-simmered sauces. Enslaved Africans, indigenous peoples, and immigrants from Mediterranean shores blended the fruit with okra, peppers, and onions, folding it into evolving regional dishes. Here, kitchen gardens placed tomatoes beside beans and corn, not as curiosities, but as ingredients. Market stalls piled them in small heaps, sold quietly to those who already knew their flavour. Medical journals and pulpit lectures continued to sow doubt. Some physicians warned that tomatoes might overstimulate the nerves or inflame the liver, echoing humoral fears carried from earlier centuries. Moralists blamed rich sources for imagined surges in passion and restlessness. Yet farm bulletins reported successful harvests, and a few agricultural writers praised the plant's hardiness and yield. Across the continent, gardens, kitchens, and printed pages offered conflicting verdicts, leaving the tomato's status uncertain, contested, and deeply regional. In crowded alleys from Naples to Barcelona, tomatoes simmered in iron pots and glazed earthenware, staining the air with a sharp, sweet scent. Vendors spooned red sauce over coarse bread and scraps of meat, while in wealthier homes, cooks reduced tomatoes with onions, herbs, and olive oil into dense condimenti for pasta and fish. Each uneventful meal pushed the memory of the so-called poisonous fruit further into the background of neighbourhood gossip. In Parisian kitchens, chefs laid tomatoes beside lemons and capers, tasting and testing until a balanced sauce clung to fillets of river fish and roasted meats. Copper pots still lined the walls, but many sauces rested briefly in ceramic bowls before reaching the table, dulling the dangers no one yet understood. Diners praised the vivid colour and bright acidity, and written menus began to list tomato preparations without cautionary notes, as if fear had never existed. Across the Atlantic, tomato vines climbed trellises at Monticello, their fruit recorded in garden journals and carried into a dining room that hosted politicians, planters, and visiting intellectuals. Seeds and cuttings passed from hand to hand through agricultural societies, while American and Mediterranean cookbooks printed recipes for stewed tomatoes, ketchups, and pies. Children grew up eating them in ordinary stews and breakfasts, and the old tales of deadly tomato feasts faded into the same category as other unproven household superstitions. Glassware gleamed beneath gas lamps as chemists weighed powders and heated samples over small blue flames. In cramped European laboratories, investigators dissolved scrapings from pipes, pewter plates, and ceramic jugs, then added reagents that clouded into telltale colors. Treatises on metallurgy and hygiene catalogued tremors, abdominal pain, and madness among miners, smelters, and painters. The symptoms resembled those once blamed on suspect foods. Gradually, heavy metals, especially lead, emerged as a common thread linking these scattered illnesses. Analysts poured vinegar, wine, and pulped tomatoes into vessels made from pewter and rough ceramics, then measured how much metal leached into the liquid. Notes described how acids stripped lead from glazes and alloys, turning ordinary meals into slow poisons. Physicians compared these findings with cases of mysterious stomach cramps and paralysis in prosperous households that favoured elaborate tableware. The pattern pointed not to the ingredients themselves, but to the gleaming plates, pitchers, and cooking pots that held them. Tomato dishes reappeared on workbenches as samples to be separated, titrated, and burned to ash. Results showed no special toxin in the fruit beyond its natural acidity, yet analyses of the pots and platters that had once carried it revealed high lead content. Public health reports began to warn against certain glazes and plumbing instead of particular vegetables. As enamel, tin-lined copper, and later aluminum and stainless steel spread through kitchens, the old bouts of so-called tomato poisoning faded into the background of medical memory. Tomatoes now spread across continents in orderly rows, their red fruit bound for sauces, ketchups, and canned goods that stocked kitchens worldwide. In Italy, machines shook vines over conveyor belts, while in California and China, harvesters crawled across wide fields under dry skies. Nutrition studies identified vitamins C and K, folate, and potassium, and highlighted lycopene as a potent antioxidant. In hospitals and clinics, researchers linked tomato-rich, Mediterranean-style diets with lower risks of heart disease and certain cancers. Yet in villages and small towns, old stories still circulated. Elders recounted tales of entire families collapsing after a single meal, or travellers keeling over after tasting a strange red fruit from abroad. In some places, the tomato patch carried an air of unease, traced to half-remembered warnings about nightshade and sorcery. Popular books and sensational articles repeated lurid anecdotes about the first Europeans to try tomatoes, rarely mentioning the heavy pewter plates and lead-glazed ceramics that had actually delivered the poison. At long tables like those of the earlier banquet, historians now saw a different scene than the rumours suggested. Well-dressed diners ate tomatoes resting on lead-rich serviceware, while poorer households using wooden trenchers faced no such peril. Botanists compared tomato leaves and flowers to those of deadly nightshade and henbane, recognizing how resemblance and incomplete plant knowledge had once blurred crucial distinctions. The same pattern appeared in modern debates over new crops and technologies, where unfamiliar origins, superficial similarities, and unseen chemistry still fostered distrust before evidence quietly dissolved much of the fear.